I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
Why, you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder!
This means something.
I am Locutus of Borg.
I must not fear, and fear is the mind killer.
Get away from her, you
Nerd! Nerd!
I'm Matt Kressel.
And I'm David Mercurio Rivera.
And
this is
Nerd Count. Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Nerd Count podcast. I'm Matt Kressel, and I'm here with...
David Mercurio Rivera. Hey, Matt.
How's it going? So today we're going to talk about one of the things that is possibly one of my favorite things about writing, other than writing itself, and that's going to conventions. So we're going to talk about writing conventions. And right now we're recording this just about a little over a week before ReaderCon.
Yes, and I'm really looking forward to that trip up there. It's one of my favorite writing conventions to attend. And, for our listeners out there, we might want to start by just explaining what a convention is.
Sure.
So what do you want to take a stab at it?
All right.
Let's take a stab at describing what the heck goes on there.
There's a whole lot of handshaking and badges. It's essentially it's a bunch of people with similar interests, typically speculative fiction for writing conventions, that the ones that we go to, or if you're going to more of a fan convention, a lot of times it's all spec fic media, things like comic books, movies, TV shows, superhero things. The fan conventions tend to be more of there's more cosplaying that goes on at these things. You'll see gaming and maybe some film screenings. Whereas then there's the more professional conventions like World Fantasy and ReaderCon and WorldCon, which are more focused on maybe some of the more scholarly or intellectual or professional aspects of writing. So they tend to focus less on like the fan stuff, like, oh, I really loved, last season of Daredevil. And then they focus more on like, let's talk about the nuances of feminist avian fiction, which was a real panel at ReaderCon.
No, are you kidding me?
No, it's true. It was
avian fiction, like in birds?
Feminist avian fiction. Yes.
Okay.
Which is, certainly an interesting topic. I'm sure there's a lot to talk about there. So as we're saying, so there are tons of conventions around the country and around the world. And it's just people get together. Usually there's an attendance fee. Usually it's not too terrible. Some of these conventions can get a little pricey. And if you're a guest, usually either they pay your way or it's a reduced fee. And then if you're a guest of honor, and usually the conventions will have, just a handful of those, then they comp you everything. They pay for your hotel, etc. So,
it's kind of a gathering of nerds from around the globe. They come together and they congregate. They all migrate, and they reach these places where they gather and they bask
and we nerd out
in their nerddom. Although,
exactly.
as you say, the level of nerddom depends on the convention.
It's true.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, conventions, it's like that's where my people are, right? So, I'll go to like a family gathering, whether it's my family, my in-laws' family, and I'll talk about the TV show For All Mankind. Or maybe I'll talk about George R. R. Martin, Game of Thrones. And like people will be like, yeah, I've heard of that. And then I start geeking out. I'm like, well, did you see this show? And what about Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine? And then their eyes kind of glaze over and they're like, uh-huh. And then the subject changes. Because it's like, they're not really into it the same way I am. But
Exactly.
when we go to these conventions, it's like all of a sudden I can talk about this stuff for hours, and then not only will people be able to tell me, "Oh yeah, I love Babylon 5 or I love Deep Space Nine," they'll tell me their favorite episodes. They'll tell me like,
Yes, and
what.
yeah, and you
Yeah,
know what, Matt, as you say that, there's going to be a lot of little stories that we tell
yeah,
during this podcast. But one story that occurs to me is I don't know if you remember one time we were attending Aresia, which is in Boston, and we were
yes.
going down an escalator, and I was
Oh,
talking to you about an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the musical episode, and what the plot was. And as I was talking to you, somebody coming on the opposite, maybe they were behind us or coming in the opposite direction.
yeah.
They interrupted our conversation and they corrected something that I said about the plot in that episode, and they sang a song as they.
Right. It was the Buffy singing episode,
Yes.
and Willow's girlfriend. What was her name?
Oh,
I should
gosh,
I should know
I
this.
can't think of it either.
Yeah, and then she's singing "I'm under your spell." So like we're on the escalator, and then he was like, "No, Willow didn't sing that to her. She sang that to Willow." And then he proceeds to go, "I'm under your spell," and he sings the way down the escalator. And then we get to the bottom of the escalator, and he goes his way, we go our way, and we're just like conventions, like
Yes,
yeah,
only at a convention would somebody correct something like that.
and
A complete
sing a correction to you as well.
stranger. Yeah.
I
Yes, that
feel like I
episode
should
was
know it.
once more with feeling. Is that the one? No,
Once
that's
more
the
with
more.
feeling.
No, that's the one where. Is that the one where they're
That's the
silent?
one. No,
That's
that's the singing
the
one.
one. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the
Once more with
once
feeling.
more
Yeah,
with feeling. Classic. Yeah.
which they used to perform at Arisia at midnight. But I went this year, and this was the first year that they didn't do it. They for some reason, I don't know
Yeah, I
why.
love that. They actually recreate the episode with actors on stage, kind of miming the actions of the characters up on screen behind them, and they lip sync to the songs and act it out. Very nerdy, very fun. One of my favorite things at Aresia.
Her name is Tara McClay in
Yes,
Buffy. Yeah,
yes,
Tara.
yes.
That's right. Um, by the way, she had a great voice too, because I remember thinking that most of the characters, most of the actors, I'm like, they can't really. They're singing all right, not great. And then she sang. I'm like, oh yeah, she's great. Um,
Yeah, that's true. A
but
couple of them had voices that I think I could sing better than they can, and I had a
yeah,
terrible voice.
now it would be all auto tuned, and you wouldn't
True.
be able to tell. But
Yeah.
so back to conventions. We described what they are. So
Right.
why?
I mean,
Yeah.
to expand on some of the things you described, Matt. I think that it's essentially when you go to a panel, you can go to. They have panels. When
Hmm.
you go to a convention, they have panels, which are basically 5 or 6 speakers. Normally, they'll address a topic, and they'll just discuss it in detail and take audience questions. And it's very interesting. It could be a fun topic, like science fiction shows, or it could be something like a ReaderCon, something more intellectual, like the writing craft and trends in writing, for example. That's one sort of activity at a con. Another activity is you can go attend readings where you'll have writers come and they'll read a short story from their collection or read a piece of their upcoming novel. And it can be, I personally love attending readings. That's one of my favorite things. I'll just hop from reading to reading. And then there's also, essentially socializing. When you go to the bar, you get a drink, and you just meet up with people. You introduce yourself, and you get to meet editors and publishers and writers. And one of the fun aspects of these conventions for me is sometimes you meet somebody who's a nobody, and just somebody like you who's just getting started in the industry, but way back when is the case, as I recall. And then a few years later, that person goes on to become somebody very important in the industry, and you've established that contact because a lot of one of the pluses for your career in attending these conventions is you get to rub elbows with editors, publishers, writers, and you make contacts that sometimes can last a lifetime. Um, so yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, so sometimes you'll hear when people talk about conventions is they'll talk about something called BarCon. So so there's two things to this. One is like sometimes people are like, look, I'm not going to pay the convention for the badge, which means I can't attend panels and I can't go into the dealer's room where they sell books, etc. But I'm just going to hang out at the bar. They call this bar conning. Bar conning. But I've also heard it used in the sense of like, that's where, for me, that's where a lot of the fun happens. And not to say it's necessarily with drinking, although, writers, we like to drink. Not everybody drinks. I know plenty of writers who don't drink at all. But there's a lot of socializing and schmoozing that takes place, usually in or around the bar, just because it's like people are hanging out, they're relaxed, they're talking, they're not on a panel, they don't, they're not in like quote unquote professional mode, although that's something we should talk about is keeping professionalism at these conventions. But like you said, we've met people and just casually at these conventions, like Paul Tremblay, right? So if you don't know, Paul Tremblay is this extremely well-selling horror author. His breakout book, I think, was Head Full of Ghosts, but he had books before that, and ever since he's had a lot of success. He's had a movie from M. Night Shyamalan made out of
Cabin
book.
in the Woods, right?
Yeah.
Cabin in the
Mm-hmm. And his latest book is horror movie. And so I remember, and maybe you could add some details to this, that we were sitting in the restaurant at ReaderCon, and back then it was in a different hotel in Boston. I forget the town. It was Burlington.
Mm-hmm.
And we're sitting there, and Paul comes up to us. We're like at a circular table. He's like, "Oh, do you guys mind if I join you?" We're like, "No, not at all." And then this like tall, lanky guy, a little awkward but super friendly, was like, "Yeah," and then proceeds to tell us a story how he grew 4 inches in one day because he had spinal surgery that corrected his scoliosis. And there was very little, if I recall, of him talking about his writing in particular. He was just like a friendly guy, and I don't think it was until later that I read his work and like, oh wow, he's really talented. And I actually ended up publishing a short story of his in Sybil's Garage, which was a magazine that I ran for a while. Dave, you helped me run that.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And now he's like, it's crazy. Like he's, you see his books in airports and stuff. And this was just like somebody we met at a convention.
Yeah, it happens. It happens so much more often than you would expect. Where the person who you're hanging out with, sometimes they're already established, and you don't realize who they are. That they're an important editor or publisher that you've been, sharing drinks with all night and chatting with. And one of my favorite memories of ReaderCon. I want to backtrack a little bit before we even get to that. I want to say that my own personal experience with cons dates back to the early 80s, because I used to attend when I was a young teenager. My brother introduced me to the San Diego Comic Book Convention, and I would go every year. And back then it was small. It was a matter of hundreds of attendees. Nowadays it's like 150,000 attendees, which is insane. Back then it was just several hundred, and I would get to schmooze with the comic book artists and writers. And I remember one of my earliest memories is, I think it was definitely in the early 80s, was getting to just walk up and say hello to Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. And and it's crazy to think that they were so accessible back then. And I remember that Jack Kirby sketched an Incredible Hulk figure for me and autographed it. And I commented on it. I was a snotty little kid. I commented on the fact that he tended to draw the Hulk with a receding hairline, because he himself had a receding hairline.
Yeah.
And I didn't say that. I just said, hey, I noticed his hair. He's kind of missing hair in his forehead. So Jack kind of took a Mark Wright and just kind of squiggled some bangs on the Hulk and just gave it back to me and said, here you go.
Nice.
So I just have it's an unforgettable memory. And somewhere in my attic, I think, somewhere buried up there is that sketch.
Yeah.
But but the San Diego Comic Book Convention was my first introduction to the idea of cons. And back then, it was 24 hours a day. So there were activities going on. 1 a.m. They mostly grade B movies, but they would occasionally throw in like a midnight panel. So it was a whole experience. It was so much fun. And the first few years, my brother took me. Then after that, as I got older, I would continue to attend with my friend Luigi, who lives in San Diego. And I attended all through the 80s, 90s. And then I stopped for a little while. And then I was reintroduced to conventions when my writers group, Altered Fluid, which you're a part of, Matt, which at that point I said, we should start attending writing conventions. And I didn't know that writing conventions existed. And our first one was, of course, ReaderCon, which is just 3 hours away in Boston.
Yeah.
And do you remember our first trip to ReaderCon?
I do. So I just want to pick up where you left off there and just talk about my first convention. First convention was it was a Star Trek convention in Manhattan. It was a hotel right across from Penn Station. I think it's called Penn Plaza Hotel. And I went with my cousin's friend. I think I was like 15 or 16 and new to the whole idea of conventions. And it just blew my mind. Like my friends, I had some friends that were into like, they'd watch Star Trek and stuff like that. But, I was into more the sci-fi geeky stuff than I think all of my friends at the time. So like going into this convention and just seeing just rooms full of people that are all totally obsessed with the same stuff that I was obsessed with was amazing. And then I remember the dealer's room just blew my mind. And I bought a Blade Runner fan book. It had like, they used to do these books of like the making of the movie and then have all like, what do you call it? Like background scenes, photographs that didn't make it into the movie. It was really cool. I still have the book at home. Mm-hmm. And then I remember there was a Star Trek trivia contest and my cousin's friend got like I don't think he was playing the game. He was sitting next to me, but he was whispering to me, "Oh, that's this one. That's this one." And I was like, "Holy crap." Like he knew every original Star Trek original series piece of trivia that you could possibly know. It was very cool. But that was like really the first and only convention I went to for years. And then I think it was our friend Lauren McLaughlin, who used to be in Altered Fluid, who's like, "Guys, you gotta go to conventions. You gotta schmooze. You gotta go to KGB Fantastic Fiction," which I now co-host with Ellen. She's like, "You gotta start going to these things. If you want to, self-promote a little bit." Which,
Yeah.
And then so I think it was 2005 was the first one, and if I'm not mistaken, we rented a van.
That's right.
And it was like a 12-seater van, one of those big like almost cargo vans, but with seats in the back. Yeah. And we just drove up there.
I drove, and you guys kept insisting that you wanted to stop to go to the bathroom.
And you wouldn't stop.
I would have none of it. I didn't want to waste any time.
So that's why we started calling you Evil David, because there was another David in the group at the time. So you were Evil David because you wouldn't let us pee.
Yes.
But and we were there, and then I believe that was the same year that that Ajit, who was in our group.
I think that was like a year or two later.
It was a year later? Okay.
Because Ajit was not there on the first trip.
Yeah, so, okay. A lot of people go to conventions. Yeah, you could go to a fan convention like, I'm just going to have fun. I'm going to dress up as my favorite character. I'm going to, go see my favorite comic book artist on a panel. I'm going to go see, going to go hear my favorite author read. You could just do that and just totally go for fun. But if you're going as a professional, there are things that you can do there. You don't have to do these things, but I think a lot of people do. And the schmoozing is like you make professional connections, right? So you get introduced to people. Maybe they're an editor or they're a publisher or maybe they're other writers. and you could volunteer to be on a panel. So how does one get on a panel? Well, it's really simple. You email the organizers of the convention, and you have to do this like up to a year in advance because they fill up quick. Say, hi, I'm such and such an author. Here's my bio of what I've published. Here's my area of expertise. I'd love to be on programming. Can you fit me in? 9 times out of 10, they're going to be like, yeah, we've got a spot for you. It depends. Some of the conventions are a little hard to get slots, but most of the time, most conventions will be like, we'd love to have you. And so by being on a panel, then other people can be like, oh, that guy Dave, he really knows his aliens. I'm curious what he's read. I mean, it's another way for people to get to know you. What else can you use conventions for?
Well, it's surprising how often I've been to a convention and I've learned about, an editor is looking for a particular type of story. They'll say, I never get, for example, let's say I'll never get any humor submissions that are of any quality, and I like to publish, a couple funny stories a year, or maybe you'll find out about a themed anthology about, I don't know, intellectual werewolves. You're like, oh wow, I have an intellectual werewolf story that I wrote last year. It's a perfect fit. It's surprising how often that happens, where something you've written matches a themed anthology. But it's essentially building those relationships. And look, if your writing is not up to snuff, it's not going to help you to have a relationship with a professional editor. But if it is, if your writing is up to snuff, having that relationship is an extra advantage when you submit your fiction for consideration.
Yeah, it doesn't mean an editor is going to accept your story. So, I'm friends. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm friends with a lot of editors in the field, and they've accepted some of my stories and they reject others. Like, it doesn't, just because you're friends with them doesn't mean they're going to automatically accept it, but they're more likely than not to at least give it a read, right?
To give it serious consideration, to come in with the way I would put it is, they want to like it.
Yeah.
before they read it, they hope it's good.
Mm-hmm.
That helps when they come with that mindset.
Yeah, and then another thing too at these conventions is, I go to a panel and they're talking about, I'm on ReaderCon. I'm doing a panel on optimistic science fiction and conflict. And so you go to these panels and you listen to them talk about a particular subject. One thing that usually happens is I get inspired, and it may not even necessarily be about the particular panel or topic that I listen to, but just being around all these ideas and people talking about writing that they love, it starts like certain areas, the creative areas of my brain working, and I usually come home inspired to like write new stuff. And
Boy,
so
I couldn't agree more. Let me tell you, when I go to conventions, I am so super stimulated by all of the creativity surrounding me that I can't help it. I walk away inspired, and I can't wait to get to work after the cons.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about like how to present yourself at conventions, because I think that there's probably etiquette involved. Like, I think that just randomly walking up to an editor and being like, "Hi, I'm Joe Writer. Read my here's my manuscript," or "Can I email you my manuscript?" or just being very aggressive. I don't know. I mean, there's different schools of thought on this, but I've always felt that it's better to approach someone like as a person and not their title, because I think that especially if somebody's like, a big agent or a big editor, and you just walk up to them and sort of like hover around them and be like all obsequious and like if you try too hard, people put up their walls, right? Because it's like, oh, like, I don't even know who you are, and already you're pitching me your 5-book fantasy trilogy. Like,
Yeah.
maybe we could have a beer for, you know what I mean? So
Yeah, well, I think that the best strategy is always to follow them into the bathroom, and if they're in the stall, you can slip your manuscript underneath the door to the stall.
yeah.
That way, there's no way for them to get out.
How
They're
many
trapped.
restraining orders is it now
And
for
then,
you? Is that 4 or 5?
no, no, Matt's completely right. I think that the most important thing is to relate to somebody as a human being first
Mhm.
before you start, smothering them with your work and being a little bit too much.
Yeah, and another thing too is like, you're representing yourself at these conventions, and so you should be on your best behavior. So there was a lot of history, in prior years of people being assholes at convention, whether they were being uh, unwanted sexual advances towards people, or just leering at people, or just rude to people. Like, you're representing yourself, so you should be as professional as possible, as respectful as possible. That's number one. Number two, hygiene. um I know this is ridiculous, but like, sometimes I go to these conventions and I walk into the con suite and it's just like my eyes water. There's so much BO. And it's like, if you just think, like, if you're trying to represent yourself as a professional, and then you're sweaty and you're stinky, and you've got stains on your shirt, and your clothing's ripped, and not like stylishly ripped, and I just don't think that you're gonna make a great impression. So I think that's part of it too.
Yeah.
That you really have to be a professional, and you know one thing that I think people talk about when they go to conventions is having to be quote unquote on all the time, because you're in like professional mode, and you want to present yourself in a certain way, and you're always trying to, like, you know um schmooze in a way that may help your career. um it may not seem that way, but I'm an introvert. Like, I get very drained by that pretty quickly. So like, I come out swinging. I'm like Rocky Balboa. I like come out swinging. But then I'll hit, after maybe it's a day, sometimes a day and a half, I hit that point where I'm like, I can't be around people.
Yeah.
And so I think it's okay if you go to these conventions and you get overwhelmed and it's like there's too many noise, too many people. I don't know what's going on. I think it's okay to go back into your hotel room or wherever you're staying and just sit for like an hour or two in quiet. I do this a lot. Like,
I do. I do
yeah.
too. And I'm less extroverted than you are, so I also get overwhelmed pretty easily. But I think that a lot of times, what's best is if you just kind of slide into a more relaxed mode where you're actually having a genuine conversation about interests that you share with people. You can talk
Yes.
about the latest season of Battlestar Galactica or whatever the latest
Yeah.
show. This season of The Boys, let's talk about that. And you get into a conversation, you relax, and you establish a contact, a relationship with somebody on that level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I'm saying be professional, I don't mean that like every single conversation that you have at the convention needs to be, transactional, right? Like, you could just sit and have fun and talk to people that you like, and to me, like, that's some of the best parts of the convention.
Yeah.
Particularly ReaderCon, I think, has a great area outside the hotel. It's like a courtyard, and usually at the end of the day, after all the panels are done, everyone's back from dinner, we all congregate outside, and it's just like you said, it's all relaxed. Everyone's talking. People walk up to different tables, they chat for a bit, they walk off. And it's a great opportunity to just like talk to people and see people. And um, you know you might see someone once or twice a year, but and then you sit down and you get to catch up. Oh, what have you been working on? What are you doing? Where are you living now? That to me is like really cool too, is to like see what people have been working on and all the great things that they're doing, and catching up with them.
That's so true. I mean, when did we first meet? Kristen Jans and Don Crenshaw. I mean, they're now editors of that anthology.
Mysterion.
Mysterion, yes.
Yeah.
We met them how long ago? 15 years ago? 20 years ago?
Yeah.
And
We're
only
still
contact
friends.
really is through conventions. I think seen the outside of a convention maybe once in all those years.
Yeah.
But it's always fun to catch up with them.
Yeah, and like we just sat in the bar, and I think she has a better memory of the first time we met than we do, but I recall that it was in the bar, and I don't know if she sat at our table or sat
Yeah.
next to us and we just started talking, but
Yeah, but that's an example of just it's like a fun con friendship that's gone on through the years.
So like the thing is, I don't think that writers necessarily need to go to conventions. They can be expensive. They can be emotionally draining and physically draining. But I also feel that it's an opportunity, right? Because, I mean, it's a little bit easier today because we have the internet and you can go on, wherever you're at X, or you're on Blue Sky, or you're on Facebook or Insta, wherever you're, Book Talk. I don't do TikTok, but that is a thing. You can connect with other writers much more easily today than in the past. But there's something about the face-to-face, human-to-human interaction in person that is irreplaceable. I don't know. What do you think?
I totally agree with you on that. Yeah, we do have those other substitutes. It's not quite the same thing. And I say that generally. I mean, just as a general proposition. Forget about writing. I think that internet, online contacts are one thing. Human to human contacts are something else.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I don't think that it's attending cons is a prerequisite to selling a novel or becoming a published writer. It's just, as you say, an opportunity, and it's also damn fun. That's
It's fun.
It's fun. So I do it for the fun, and the professional perks are just a byproduct of that fun.
Yeah.
We have so many stories over the years, and so many weird people we've met, and in situations. Why don't we talk about Mafia a little bit? Remember, we played the game Mafia. It was a game that we was introduced to us during our first or second visit, I forget, to ReaderCon, and it's a game where basically you sit in a large circle. You could have 20 participants or 25 participants, and a certain number of players. Is it 3 players are secretly chosen to be members of the mafia? The goal of this sitting in the circle and talking is to determine which of the 3 people in the circle are members of the mafia. And the only way to determine that is because they lie, is just through trying to see if somebody's lying and just checking those signals. And then after a certain amount of conversation, everybody closes their eyes, and then the mafia members only open their eyes, and they pick somebody in the circle to quote unquote kill. And then you open your eyes and they say, David, you've been killed by the mafia. I leave the circle. And then the conversation continues, and by the fact that I've been killed, they try to determine if
it's Lord of the Flies. So imagine if, like, your most embarrassing moment in elementary school or junior high, when you're going in the cafeteria to sit at a table and there's no seats available, and you're just feeling really awkward, self-conscious, and everybody's looking at you. Like that to me is the experience of Mafia. It's so intense. I mean, yes, it's fun, but it also, for me anyway, who is in general extremely private person, to have like a group of people saying you're guilty, you're a mafia, and then I'm not, it was just it was very intense. But so I think Kelly Link was the one who introduced us to that. She's like, oh, we got to play Mafia. She was very, very Like I could
Yes.
almost see her like steepling her fingers as she was planning this and just getting us all to play. And I remember it was like that
We had
first
some,
game.
we had some heavy hitters,
Heavy
and
hitters. It's like Samuel R. Delaney,
yes,
uh,
Jonathan Jonathan Jonathan
Jen
Lethem.
Lethem, Kelly
Yep.
Link, obviously.
James Patrick Kelly.
James Patrick Kelly. Was Gordon Van Gelder playing? I don't know if
I
he was
don't
playing.
remember.
Yeah, I think Ellen Kushner, Delia Sherman were in that game. There was a lot of people, and it was very intense. So with this, we have two funny stories about that. I'll tell the Lethem one if you want to tell the Tremblay one, because I think you were in the Tremblay one.
Sure,
So
sure.
Jonathan Lethem. So I was in the game. I wasn't Mafia. I was Citizen, whatever they were called, a villager, and I floated a theory. And my theory was, so Jonathan Lethem, he's like a Mafia mastermind. Like he was like the best Mafia player I've ever seen. And he was always so good. And the reason why he was good, he just like took control of the room. And so he basically was like, let's go around the circle and everyone say whether or not they're Mafia. He's like, let's just hear it from your own mouth. Like, are you Mafia or not? So we do that. So I'm watching everyone very carefully as I do this. And my theory was the following. My theory was those who are Mafia already are going to be less interested in this conversation because they already know. They already know who's who. So therefore, they're not going to be looking at who's speaking. They're going to be looking down at their hands or looking in a different direction. And so I did this, and I noticed that 2 or 3 people didn't look at each person. And I was like,
Telltale sign.
So I said this. And as I was saying this to Jonathan, first of all, it may not be apparent, but I am also a shy person. I've gotten over this a lot in the last decade or so, but like, Jonathan was still a well-known author, but he was a very successful author and I was a nobody, and I'm trying to explain this to him and I'm kind of nervous and I'm not explaining it very well. And he goes, Matthew, you're stupid. This makes no sense. And like just called me stupid in front of the whole room. And I was mortified. I don't know how I looked on the outside, but I was like, oh God. Turns out, I actually was 2 of the 3 that I picked were I was correct. Like that my theory worked. But I was mortified. And then the next morning.
Yes, I was trying to make you feel better because
Wait. I'm like after the game, I'm like walking back to the room. I see Gavin and Kelly in the hallway, and they're like, "It's okay, Matt." I'm sitting there like, I'm like how what's his name, Pigpen in Peanuts with the cloud of dirt. I had this like cloud of like shame about me. I'm walking back to the room. They're like, "It's okay, Matt. It's fine." I'm like, and like I'm mortified. I'm like, "Oh my God, everyone thinks I'm a moron. I'm this, upstart writer, and I sound like an idiot, and I'm feeling terrible." And the next morning, I'm like, "All right,
yes.
I feel a little better." We're walking to like Dunkin' Donuts.
That's when I intervened because I thought you were still upset the next morning. You were saying this is so embarrassing. People think I'm stupid, and I was called stupid in front of everybody, and I was trying to make you feel better. I said, Matt, let it go. Like this is it's a stupid game. It was at night. Everybody was drinking. We had a fun time, but
you're like nobody remembers.
There's not a single person here who even remembers that at this point. Come on. And then no sooner do I get those words out of my mouth that James Patrick Kelly walks by, and he says, "Oh, Matt, you're not stupid. Don't feel bad."
Yeah. So Lethem, I saw Lethem in the dealer's room that afternoon, and he goes, "I owe you an apology, Matthew." He didn't say I'm sorry. He goes, I probably owe you an apology for that. Blah, blah. And then like when I was like, But yeah, no, I was mortified for that. But then there was the other one. It was a long game. Paul Tremblay was in this game. I think it was you. And
yes.
and
I was a member. I was a member of the Mafia. And the game had just gone on and on and on for these games can last for hours. So we're probably 2 hours in, and we're down to the final 3 players. It was me. I was the lone remaining member of the mafia. Rajan Khanna in our writers group was another person, and Paul Tremblay was another person who remained. And basically, it came down to Paul Tremblay and myself and Paul pleading with Raj to kill the other person. So I was telling Raj, I'm not mafia. It's Paul Tremblay. He's the mafia member, and Tremblay is saying the opposite. No, it's obvious. David is the mafia member, and we went on, and Raj didn't know what to do, but ultimately he went my way. He said, "Yes, I agree. You're telling the truth, David. I think Tremblay is the mafia member," and he killed him. And as a result of that, I won. The mafia won the game, and Tremblay was so upset that he just got up and he kicked the chair that was behind him, and the chair kind of went flying. And so what I found amusing was that right after the game, like the story really kept talking about Tremblay throwing a chair. And the story kept morphing and get more extreme. He picked up a chair and he
threw it across the room, and it hit the wall and almost hit somebody. It's evolved over the years, and
over the years. So whenever I see Tremblay to this day, I tell him, I tell him, remember the time you tried to hit me with the chair? And so yeah, it was a
he still jokes about it. He'll still sometimes sign posts with throws chair.
Yes, exactly. And so it was again fun interacting with all of these people at these conventions, and you really, like I said, build relationships as a result of all the game playing. So
I have two stories from Albacon.
And by the way, before you even go on, I want to say that before we started the podcast, I went online and I checked to see how many cons exist, and there were over 130 conventions across cities, in the United States.
I feel like it's got to be more than that. You mean like spec-fic conventions, like sci-fi conventions?
Spec-fic. And so in theory, you could spend your time, just hopping from convention to convention all year long. And become just a convention hopper. I'm thinking of doing that. So anyway, Albacon is one of the smaller ones that
like the people that follow the Grateful Dead around, or I guess now fish. What do they call them? Fish heads.
Yep.
You could just get one long convention.
Exactly.
Albacon is this small convention up in Albany. They invited us one year, and I have two stories. I was talking to David Hartwell. He was an editor at Tor, died tragically a couple years ago. He fell down the stairs while moving books. I mean, I guess if you're going to go, killed by books is a good way to go, but it's sad to see him go. But we're talking to him in the hallway, and in the next room, there was this group video game, and essentially each person sits at a different terminal, a computer, and you pilot a starship. So it's very much Star Trek like. So you have navigation, tactical, you have the captain's chair, communication, etc. And each person's at a different computer. So this kid runs out to the lobby where I'm talking to Dave, and he goes, "Quick, anyone know how to fly a starship?" Now, this was a hotel, right? So people were checking into the hotel all the time. And it just happened to be also near the Albany airport. So two pilots were checking in right at this moment. They were at the desk. And then without missing a beat, one of the pilots says, "I do." And then goes with the kid with his luggage. He's still in his pilot's uniform with his luggage, and goes in and helps the kid pilot the starship, which I thought was
that's a great story. Oh man, I hadn't heard that one. That's great.
And then the other one, this one, you were with me for, we were like, oh, let's go to this panel. It was discuss your favorite, your favorite media, whether it's TV, films, or books. And we're like, oh, it's something fun to do. We'll talk about, maybe the TV show we're watching or a book we read. And it's just me, you, and this woman who's dressed all in white, has white hair, white gray eyes. And we're just talking
Yes.
about stuff we like, and
This I remember. This is kind of unforgettable.
and we're like near the pool. We're right next to the pool. For some reason, they decided to do this in the pool area. The pool was closed for some reason. I think because it was winter. I don't remember, but the pool was closed, and we're just sitting there next to it. And she goes, "Whoa, did you feel that?" And then like I look at Dave and I look at her, and she goes, "A ghost just passed right through me." She goes, "A spirit just went right through me." And we're like, "Oh."
Okay. Yep.
And then the panel happened to be right next to like the con suite, like some of the rooms faced like the pool area. And then she's like, "Don't throw out the mayo. Save the mayo. I'll take it home." And there was like a huge tub of mayo. Like I'm talking like a gallon-sized tub of mayo. And it was half eaten. Like it was half gone. She's like, "Don't throw it out. Save the mayo." Like
She wanted to take the mayo home with her.
she
That
was
was really
very,
disturbing.
I mean,
That was more disturbing to me than the ghosts.
not only used mayo, but used mayo in a con suite that was like open to the elements probably for like 48 hours or something. And she needed to take it home. Anyway, that was my Albacon story.
That's a good one. Well, you know what? That reminds me of a Lunacon story. Lunacon is a convention here in New York City, right? It was up in wasn't it in Jersey for some time?
It was briefly in Jersey. I don't remember the town, but I remember the hotel. Like half the stairs were broken, so you ended up like it was a labyrinth to get to a panel. You'd have to go all the way across the building.
Yes, well, I remember that we attended a panel that took place in a hot tub next to a swimming pool, and it was I don't remember what the topic was. Gosh,
it was alien biological life. Alien
that
life.
that was it. Alien biological life. So we're all sitting in the hot tub, and this panel is taking place. You know, the presenters are speaking, and but there are also hotel attendees who are completely unaware, with good reason, that this is an official panel that's taking place. So strangers are just kind of hanging out at the pool, and they're totally befuddled by the conversation that's going on, and the way people are taking turns speaking. And
but they joined in to the
they
didn't know they were part of a convention panel. They just got in a hot tub and everyone starts talking about alien life, and they
I know. It wasn't that the same convention where there were a group of people in the pool kind of interlocking arms.
It was a cuddle party in the pool.
Cuddle party. Yes.
So we look over and there's a mass of people, maybe 30 people, just like cuddling in the, like floating, like an island of people.
Yes.
It was very surreal. That was also the convention where we had a secret reading.
Yes, the secret reading.
So I'm not going to name this woman's name. Very sweet woman. She was running the convention, and so David and I are like, yeah, we'd love to do a reading. If you want to schedule us back to back or at the same time, we'll just do 15 minutes each, whatever works. And she's like, I got it. And then like it's the day of the convention, and we're not on the schedule, and she's like, don't worry, I have a secret reading for you. I'm like, a secret reading? She's like, it's going to be a surprise. And I'm like, how are people going to show up if they don't know about it? And she's like, it's fine. We're going to do it in the bar.
Well, let me tell you what. In her defense, I will say that her theory was that sometimes one of the things we haven't talked about yet is that there are oftentimes parties at conventions, and sometimes there are secret parties, and you find out, hey, there's a secret party taking place on this floor at this time, and everybody who's cool wants to learn about the secret parties so they can attend them. So she kind of used that logic and to set up our reading. Said if it's a secret reading, people will think it's cool and they'll all want to attend.
Yeah, it didn't work out that way.
That was the theory.
It was scheduled in the bar. There was like sports on the TV. It was really loud. So we ended up like moving it to basically a hallway, like outside the pool. And of course, like no one shows up. And I felt really bad because she ended up like just like really expressing how sad she was about life. She
felt worse than we did, I think.
What?
I think she felt worse than we did.
Yeah, no, she felt really bad, and it was it was an interesting time.
Did we read to her? I think we may have read a little bit to her.
I think we might have. I think we might have done a brief
That'll
reading.
teach her.
Yeah.
That'll teach her.
So there was also a couple Wisconsin stories.
Oh man, Wisconsin is out in Wisconsin. So
Madison,
says
Madison, Wisconsin. It's
we have to actually fly out there, and it's basically
it's like a feminist convention, and so it's like the first night there. I don't know if it was Thursday or Friday, and there's a karaoke thing going on, and we're watching Tempest Bradford, who's in our writers group at the time, do karaoke, and this young woman comes up to us and she's like, yeah, I'm with the con committee, just checking in, is this your first WisCon? Yes, it's our first WisCon. Oh, welcome. Just remember the 3-2-1 rule. I'm like, what's that? She goes, make sure you get at least 3 hours of sleep, 2 meals, and 1 bath a day. So my wife always says that to me, like during COVID when we got a little lax with bathing. She's like, 3-2-1, Matt, 3-2-1.
That's great.
So you and I are. Oh, go ahead.
Maybe you were gonna tell this part of the story, Matt. When we were kind of going to different parties late at night. It was like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, and you're just kind of going from room to room and schmoozing with people, and it's crowded, and it reached a point where it was very late, early in the morning, and we're kind of just on the floor, leaning against the wall,
sitting on the floor in the hallway,
just kind of chatting with everybody around us. And all of a sudden, we looked on the hallway, and in come the police. Right?
I think you're conflating two stories, but go ahead.
Well, the way that I recall it, maybe you can correct me, is a couple of cops showed up. I'm like, holy crap, it looks like it's a raid of some sort.
Yeah.
And they came and didn't they just...
they just took out the garbage.
They took out the garbage?
That was it. They came. Yeah. I was like, oh, they're shutting us down. We're too loud. Yeah. Shit. Like, because they had that like swagger down the hallway. I'm like, crap, something happened. This is, this party's over. And they just picked up the trash and left.
That was very strange.
But the other one, when we were sitting in the hallway, it was like you said, it was like 3 or 4 in the morning. We're sitting in the hallway, like our backs against the wall, and the bar is long closed by this point. The parties are all like the dregs. There's no beer left. And then I like look up down the hallway. It's like a long hallway, like The Shining. And I look up and I see in the fuzzy distance 2 furries walking down the hallway, like 2 people dressed up in animal costumes. Like I think one was a cow, and they're like coming down the hallway. Like what is this? And they're pulling like one of those red flyer wagons, and on the back of the wagon is a keg of beer and like a small shelf of alcohol. And they come down and literally start pouring drinks for people. What would you like? You would like a whiskey, Coke, here you go, and give a drink, and then just keep going down the hall, and then they disappeared around the bend. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen.
That's hilarious. I didn't even know what a furry was until our trip when we went to Wisconsin that time, and I was on the elevator, and I was taking the elevator down, and I was in an elevator full of furries, people dressed in animal costumes. And one of the furries spoke to me, and when they spoke, they had a high-pitched voice, like intentionally like falsetto.
Mm-hmm.
So they were saying, hey, would you like to come to our party later? It's at like 10 p.m. in this room. And I said,
all respect to furries. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was a fun time, but because I would never heard of furries, I didn't know what furries were, and I was in an elevator.
Yeah.
It struck me as very strange.
Yeah, I think you tend to get interesting people, especially at the fan conventions. Like the pro conventions, you'll get a couple, but the fan conventions is where you get the kind of, let's say, outlier personalities.
Right.
So, just a little con etiquette we were talking about before, like no inappropriate touching. Don't ever touch anybody without permission. Don't hug anyone without permission. Like some people are just, I guess, don't really get boundaries like that.
Yeah, it's always tricky when when you see somebody, should you go for a hug or not?
I always
Um,
say, is it okay if we hug? I always say that,
yeah,
like if I see someone I haven't seen in a while, because
yeah,
you never know. Like some people just like, no,
they don't like that.
I don't want to
Exactly.
touch you. Stay away from me.
You didn't follow the 3-2-1 rule.
Yeah. Talk about hygiene.
Yeah. So,
Um, so we're coming up almost on an hour. Uh, do we have anything we didn't talk about, like con wise?
I'm
There's so
sure
much to talk about.
there's a million stories that we have from over the years from attending different conventions, but I think that we've given a good sense of the fun that's involved, and also, if you want, like I said, some of the uh, uh, more serious aspects of the conventions for professional development and for intellectual stimulation. If you want to attend for example, in ReaderCon, they have very intellectual discussions of, I love, by the way, writing craft
Yeah.
panels. I just have a weakness for them. I just love hearing authors talk about their approach to writing and their little tricks. Even if I don't necessarily use them, I just find it inspiring to listen to that. But there's also intellectual discussions about trends in writing and different types of writing, and so there's that aspect. And it's a good source of first of all, fun, and then second of all, it's a great way to develop professionally, make contacts, and build your career.
Yeah, and one thing that didn't really touch on is they also usually have great dealers rooms. So they usually there's uh, a big room set aside for publishers to sell books, and oftentimes they're small presses. So you get to see like really great books put out by, presses that you're not going to necessarily see in the big chain Barnes and Noble, or the Amazon algorithm is not going to feed it to you properly. So you get to see like cool stuff like that. Some of the booksellers will work hard to make sure that all the guests attending, that their books are for sale. So it's like, oh, I really liked what that person had to say in that panel, and then you go to the dealer's room and oftentimes their books are for sale there. So that's always a nice thing.
I'm
And
so
then,
glad, so glad you mentioned that, because that's one of my favorite places to hang out is the
yeah,
dealer's room. Just walking through, looking at the book covers. Also, there's usually an artist's room where you can go and look at different
yeah, the
illustrations.
art gallery. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
great.
usually most conventions will also have like an artist guest of honor, and then you could see their work there, and then they'll have other artists there. And for some reason, always a lot of cat pictures, but
That's true. Yeah.
cat and dragons. But yeah, it's always cool to see that art, and yeah,
Mhm.
just in general, be around creative people. And so if you're a person that can't travel, a lot of conventions nowadays do hybrid models where they'll have people who come in via Zoom or whatever, which is always interesting. I prefer the in person, as we said, but if that's something that works for you, um, and just to summarize, I don't think it's a necessity for writers. I know it can be burdensome in financial ways, physically, emotionally, etc. But it's also, I think it's a great plus. I always feel rejuvenated after, like creatively. I feel like I've made new friends and reinforced old friendships, and um, just in general, it's nice to get feedback on your stuff. You have somebody come up to you and be like, "Oh, I really loved your stuff." Real quick story: at World Fantasy, this woman Emma Torres, who's a great writer herself, was like, "Oh, I've been teaching." Well, someone said to me, "Oh, Emma Torres wants to meet you. She's been teaching one of your stories." I'm like, "She's been teaching one of my stories?" She said to me, "Truth is like the sun. And I was like, oh, that story I published, it disappeared. I heard crickets. I thought it was like a fart in the wind. I thought it disappeared. And she's like, oh no. She's like, hundreds, maybe thousands of students have read that story. And in general, everybody loves it. And I was like, wow, like that, like it blew my mind. And that I never would have learned that had I not been to a convention.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Something that a term that we invented is after we attend conventions, sometimes you come home and we have what you call the post-con blues,
Yeah.
which is that, you've been immersed in these conventions for sometimes, 4 days. And for those 4 days, you're in this world of people that think like you do, and who enjoy the same things you do and who speak your language. And, you're in that totally, you're in another place. And then all of a sudden, it's over and it's back to the
work.
real world, to work. Yeah. And as a result, you feel the post-con blues. So, but you know what? It's worth it because of the fun of the convention. And there's always another convention to look forward to.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to ReaderCon in a couple of weeks.
I'm looking forward to it too. Maybe the next podcast we record, maybe we'll have some post-ReaderCon news or any interesting stories that happen. But I think it's a good time to wrap up. So any final thoughts, Dave, before we close out?
No, that's it. Other than that, I think that pretty much sums it up. It's been fun reminiscing.
It has been fun. So I'm Matt Kressel. I'm here with Mercurio David Rivera, and we'll see you at the next Nerd Count podcast.
All right. So long, folks.
So long. You have been listening to the Nerd Count podcast. That's our show. But if you want more shows, check us out at nerdcountpodcast.com or your favorite podcasting site. See you next time.
Get those nerds! Nerds! Nerds!